5 wins. A 4-win improvement from last season. But what are the Blazers missing? What do they need to do to take the next step in this evolution as a team to move past challenging for one of the last playoff spots in the West and become that top tier or upper tier playoff contender?
I mean, to me, they're missing a consistent third scorer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this isn't, and granted, we all thought that would be Yusuf Nurkic going into there. And he has been inconsistent this year. And he's a guy that I think we're all starting to realize, maybe now that we see more of him, that, you know, expecting 20 points a night, 18 to 20 a night, isn't going to be what the Blazers are going to get from Yusuf Nurkic. It's going to be more like what we saw this last week, where, you know, he had 2 great games against the Lakers and Thunder. He scored 28 and 25 points, but then he picked up 2 quick fouls against Memphis and was an absolute non-factor in that game. If anything, he may have been detrimental for the Blazers against the Grizzlies. So, to me, they're missing that third scorer. I mean, Evan Turner tried to pick up the slack against Memphis, but also Dame is struggling to shoot right now. And so, I think it shows why Neil Olshey was so hell-bent, in a way, on getting another scorer here in the offseason. Because to me, that's what they're missing. Their defense has been great this year. It's exceeded expectations so far. They just, I mean, they're only giving up 100 points a game. If we had said at the start of the year, we'd think they're doing much better than 6 and 5. So maybe they are underperforming, to Jared's point. But they're not getting consistent scoring outside of C.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard. And to start the season, Damian Lillard has been struggling to shoot the basketball, especially from distance. And so they need that third scorer. I don't know if it's just if it's Nurkic being more consistent, or if it's just this is who they're going to be this year.
I think the only real legitimate option for that third scorer is Yusuf Nurkic. So I looked at this question as kind of twofold, like what do they need from their current roster, and then maybe what do they need outside of their current roster to get to where they want to go. On the current roster, it has to be Nurkic. When Nurkic plays great, the Blazers are great. We've seen that, you know, last season, we've seen it this season, and he has been so inconsistent this season, and it might just be because he's 23 years old, and it might be because he has an issue letting things go. Like when he gets into foul trouble, he has a hard time getting himself back into the game in an efficient and effective way. And maybe that's just he needs more years, he needs more maturity. I still think that he's going to be that solid third option for the Blazers. I just haven't seen it consistently enough yet this season. I also think they need a scorer off the bench. And then I think that they might need to upgrade at small forward. I think that you should be more patient on that because Maurice Harkless has not been good this year on offense or defense. He hasn't played well on either end of the court. And I think you should be patient because he played well last year, and you want to see if he can build on that. Even if he hasn't yet, it's early in the season. But if he doesn't by the trade deadline, if he doesn't by the end of the season, then maybe you need to look at upgrading that position if you can. And then they need scoring off the bench because Evan Turner's good, and Ed Davis is good, and Pat Connaughton has been good at times. They have some good players off the bench, but they don't really have any consistent offensive threats that can come in and just be instant offense off the bench. And so I was looking at what players are out there that might be available, that would be happy coming off the bench, that aren't going to be, you know, sore because they're not in the starting lineup. And I think the Blazers might look to go after someone like Jordan Clarkson, who's the backup guard for the Lakers. He's a very effective scorer. He averages about 15 points a game this season and about 20 minutes on the court. He's shooting the ball really well this season. He's always been a good scorer. He's shooting better this season than he has in seasons past. And the Lakers, the reason he might be available is because the Lakers have their eyes set on next offseason free agency. They want to create cap space to get max level free agents, you know, 2 or 3 of them if they can.
In order to do that,
yeah, exactly. In order to do that, they need to shed some salary. And Jordan Clarkson's their fourth highest paid player on the team. So the Blazers, he makes about $11.5 million per year this season. The Blazers could use the trade exception from Alan Crabb to bring him in, or they could trade expiring contracts like Ed Davis, Shabazz Napier to make the numbers work. And I know that's a lot to give up. And so maybe you do the trade exception, but if the Blazers are worried about salary cap ramifications, then maybe they go the route of trading some of their contracts to get him. So that's an option. I think that they need some scoring off the bench to kind of take that next step.
Man, you're on fire right now, man. I just wanted to let you go. I agree. I think that from internally, the Yusuf Nurkic thing is interesting. And it was cool because to hear Terry's thoughts talk today, because when we were all kind of done and wrapping up at practice, I was just got to be a fly on the wall, and Kevin Calabro was there, and him and Terry kind of got into a conversation about what's up with Yusuf from the perspective of what do you do when he picks up 2 fouls? Do you let it rip? Do you let him stay in the game, or is it more of a we need to get him out, conserve what's left with him, versus when you get 4 fouls early where you just let it rip, let him go because there's less time. But also he said, it doesn't hurt us as much as a team to have Yusuf Nurkic on the bench for picking up 2 quick fouls as it does hurt Yusuf Nurkic to pick up 2 quick
Such a
fouls.
good point, yeah.
And so, you're thinking about that and you're like, yeah, because he gets out of a flow, it gets into his head, and before you know it, that game's toast, and he's scoring 6 points.
Yeah. Well, and Dame has mentioned this. I mean, the reason we see Yusuf Nurkic get the ball so early in games is that's something they're purposefully doing.
Oh, totally.
They want him to be involved in the game.
Yes.
Dame says if Nurk is involved offensively, he's much more involved defensively as well. So they're trying to get Nurk kind of just get his confidence going early in games. And so when he picks up, like he did against Memphis, where he picked up those 2 quick fouls against a very good center he knew was going to be a challenging night already in Marc Gasol, he struggles mentally with that. Whether it's, like you said, maybe it's a lack of maturity because he is young. Maybe it's just he's not mentally tough. Maybe at that right now, that's where he is at his point in his career. But they need him to be involved early in games, and they need him to be involved and active on both ends of the floor because I don't think he's quite been the same defensive player this year as he was last year as well.
I think he's still been pretty good defensively. I mean, the numbers are there, and even out on the court. I mean, the Memphis game, I think that you want to be careful not to react too strongly to one game because he just come off playing 2 really exceptional games on offense and defense. The Memphis game was just weird. He was the 2 fouls he got early were really dumb fouls, reaching when he doesn't need to reach, and so he wants to avoid those. I'm curious, did Terry and Kevin come up with a plan for what they want to do if he gets in early foul trouble?
You know how Terry
or is that like privileged information?
Oh, dude, no, it's just more of him kind of laughing it off when it comes down to what do you do. And I think Terry's answer today was something. Do you want me to answer that? Was his line after every follow-up question that came, because we heard that about Nurkic and we're like, whoa, hold up, let's hang around and listen to this conversation, which was really cool. But yeah, I think that it comes more to youth, and he's still a younger player, and he's still figuring these things out, and that these games are going to happen, and you've got to work through because they would like to have him out on the court.
This isn't the first time he ran into foul trouble early in games. In the first 2 weeks, he did it almost consistently, and then that's, I think, one of the reasons he struggled so much those first 2 weeks is because he just wasn't as involved in the game, and whether it's him mentally checking out, him putting pressure on himself to do something once he does get back in the game, whatever it is, he just hasn't performed as well. Back to your Jordan Clarkson thing, I completely agree with you on the trade exception, and if they could get Jordan Clarkson, that would be exactly what they need, because they don't have a Tyreek Evans like what Memphis had.
Yeah, I was thinking about him. Yeah.
He scored 21 points for them off the bench, and Blazers couldn't stop him in that game. The Blazers just don't, even though Evan Turner scored 16 or 18 points that night, that's not Evan Turner's game.
Right.
And they could use a guy like with Jordan Clarkson's skill set.
Not to spend too much more time on this one because we still have our predictions to do, but you had me thinking about just from a development standpoint, from in-house, not necessarily trade options, but I mean, so much we're banking on what happens with Noah Vonleh. Yeah. How good of a player can he be? Is he that starter? We haven't mentioned Chief in a little while. Yeah. He's kind of been MIA, so he's out of sight, out of mind type deal. Pat Connaughton, what are we getting out of Pat Connaughton? I just think if you have those pieces that are chipping away at these, so it's not all on your big 3. Yeah. Maybe Yusuf Nurkic or they can afford to have a bad night with Dame or Yusuf if you've got one of these guys stepping up.
I think losing Aminu has hurt a lot because he was playing so well on offense and defense, and you haven't had players like Maurice Harkless, step up to kind of take the reins in his absence. And so, I mean, if you had some of their role players perform more consistently, that would be helpful. But there's a track record there, and I don't know. I mean, Noah Vonleh, he's still young, but he might be what he is, a very good defensive player, a very good rebounder, and a very limited offensive player. That might just be who he is. I think if you're looking at internal development, you're probably looking at Caleb Swanigan, Zach Collins, those guys who are more of, you don't know exactly what they are, but that's not probably this season. That's probably down the road.
One other player that we know who he is but came up big was Shabazz Napier.
Yeah.
To see him have a big game like that, and one of those fly-on-the-wall conversations today was about Shabazz Napier. And, people are, Stotts had mentioned, people are saying, well, why don't you get him in the game more often? And it's so much of it is based on matchups.
Right.
And it's not just your point guard and your shooting guard matchup. It's what does the 3 and the 4 bring to the table.
Yeah.
He's like, that's what allowed him to bring Shabazz into the game, was when they had Parsons at the 4. Because then he was like, okay, I can drop Evan Turner down. Then the window is open for him to play. But if those matchups aren't there at the 3 and the 4, you can't throw him in there with an already small backcourt.
Yeah, I'll be interested, though, to see if he does take some minutes away from Connaughton, because Pat, outside that first week, has not shot the ball extremely well. I believe in the last 3 games we're mostly talking about, he shot 25%.
The last 4 games, he's 2 for 10.
Ouch.
And you need, what they're banking on him giving, besides a good defensive effort, is to hit open 3-pointers when they're there, and he just hasn't been giving it to them for the last week and a half.
It's tough with Shabazz, though, because he's 6 feet tall.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a defensive liability. He's not a very strong defender to begin with. And Stotts doesn't really take Dame or CJ off the court at the same time. He always has one of them on the court. So then you're looking at pairing 2. I mean, you already have 2 small guards in Lillard and McCollum, but they're both 6'3". Shabazz 6 foot. So when you pair him with either Dame or CJ, it's an even worse situation defensively. And so there aren't a lot of teams you can hide him defensively, and that's a problem.